Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Visiting Artist Lecture at Anderson Ranch. I want to welcome everybody in person as well as our virtual participants. I'm Liz Farrell, Artistic Director of Painting, Drawing, and Printmaking. Before we begin, please silence your cell phones. We will be hearing from Elaine Buss tonight, and after she presents, we'll have time for questions. Elaine's visit is generously supported by the Francis Gordon Kansas City Visiting Artists Fund. To begin, Anderson Ranch would like to acknowledge that our campus resides on the traditional ancestral territory of the Ute people, who called the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond home for over 800 years. It is my pleasure to introduce Elaine Buss. Elaine grew up in the wide open prairie fields of Lively Grove, Illinois. Her work explores ambiguity and the nondescript, specifically in relation to the sensory, ineffable, and intangible experience of inhabiting a human body. Elaine currently serves as foundation faculty at Kansas City Art Institute. Her MFA is from Ohio State University. Her metaphorical approach to materials has garnered multiple recognitions. Highlights include the Inspiration Grant, Ceramics Monthly Emerging Artist Award, the International Award for Visual and Performing Arts, and an Artist Inc. Fellowship from the Mid-America Arts Alliance. Elaine exhibits internationally, and her work is held in collections such as Honos Art in Rome, Italy, Belger Collection in Kansas City, Missouri, Baggs Library in Columbus, Ohio, and Creta Rome in Rome, Italy. She's a visual arts resident at Charlotte Street Foundation in their interdisciplinary program. So please join me in welcoming Elaine Buss.
All right, hello. Can you all hear? Is it good? Okay. All right. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Liz, for that introduction. Thank you also to Anderson Ranch for inviting me in to be a visiting artist. I'm excited for this opportunity. Thank you to the staff who have facilitated my visit, specifically Meriwether, Joanne, and Jules. I appreciate you. And special thanks to Scott Francis and Susan Gordon, who support the Kansas City Visiting Artist Fund. So I am primarily a ceramic artist, though I do use many other materials. And I make installation and sculpture. Many of my visual sources tend to be historical in nature. Often they're stone, and not by choice, but more just by happenstance that I seem to be drawn to stone. Stone carries the history of our planet, and it also carries the history of our human experiences and efforts through time. So I take these sources and I utilize various aesthetic aspects that they have and move them into my own work. And sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's more indirect. When I make my installations, I'm very aware of what kind of experience I would like for the viewer to have. These are ceramic pillars. They're somewhat based on architectural forms, also on the remnants of ruins, and also a little bit organically derived. So inside of each of these pillars, at varying heights from the top, there is melted ceramic substances. It's not glaze, it's a combination of frits, plasters, metals, minerals, and viewers are given flashlights to explore the interior of the forms. Some of the oculi at the top are larger than others. Some are really small and really require you to get pretty close to the work to look inside of it. In this gesture of making a viewer come really close to the work, and also making these objects feel a little tippy, they're not, but they feel that way. I want to make the viewer very aware of their body's presence. And viewers are really placed as active agents in the viewing of this work. Their engagement determines how much they'll discover, and even the pieces that just have pools on top, go forward, have something to reveal below the surface. Like in this one, there are crystals that are revealed below that glassy surface. So I had a pretty big shift in my practice in 2016, and most of my work that I'm showing you is kind of from then forward. At that time, I was invited to participate in the Creta Rome residency. I was in graduate school, so I applied for a lot of grants and got enough funding to go. I went to research sacred spaces, specifically sacred spaces built according to a system of geometry called sacred geometry that's intended to imbue space with a natural harmony. However, when I got there, I found that I was really distracted by all of the artifacts instead. They carry with them stories, and I felt like there were secrets held within, and I really was felt like they were enigmatic for me, and I needed to know their secrets. I needed to know what information they could tell me. And they ranged in scale. The one on your left is pretty large. It's about this high. It's the bottom of a millstone. There would have been a collard form that sat on top and was turned in order to grind the grain. On the right, those are loom weights from vertical looms that would have been used to hold the warp tight. And the one, the millstone, to me, calls more to a body relationship. And the loom weights are more hand-sized. So there's different relationships to body in the things I was looking at, too. And since I'm an artist, and the way I best know how to understand things is to make about them, I made versions of all of these artifacts that I found. And in trying to understand the stories they had, I decided I needed to speak their language. And I found their common grammar of an inflated curve interrupted by an edge or a line around the form. And even though it's a really simple grammar, I was able to make hundreds of variations. I got really obsessive about it. It got really intense. I was just like surrounded, and it was like me and all my little form babies in my studio. And I wanted to honor them in some way. I really felt like their caretaker. I felt their name Kindred Form because I felt kindred with them. And I didn't want to just stick them on a white cube in a gallery, and I didn't want to put them on the floor, so I needed to give them a home. And I decided the best way to give them a home was to tell their story. So I made this installation. This is about 35 feet wide and 20 feet deep, so I had a lot of space to play with. On the ground, that is the unfired clay. It's the same clay that was made to make the forms. So it's a combination, therefore, of impermanent raw clay and permanent eternal objects. I made the pathways really narrow so that when visitors went through this piece, they had to take a really slow pace. This forced them to take the time to notice the nuances and the subtleties within the work, and also invited a more peaceful experience. The drawings on the ground were done with sticks, and I turned the sticks, and they were cut according to the dimensions of my own body, and the dimensions were as follows: fingertips to sternum, fingertips to shoulder, fingertips to elbow, and wrist to elbow. And this logic comes from wanting their home to match the same logic of how they were made. And if my body made them, then their home should also live within those same proportions. So That was my thesis exhibition from my MFA at Ohio State. And it got a lot of attention, and it also got me an invitation to show in this gallery in Columbus called Sean Christopher Gallery. And he asked me to do a version of that installation, and I went to visit the gallery, and it was 4 consecutive rooms in a row, and I didn't feel like it had the right flow for that iteration of the work, but I did see it as this amazing opportunity to play with the linearity of the space and to play with things like steps in a process. So I decided to think about the way that we gather and process information, and each room in the installation, in the whole piece, is a different aspect of how we interact with systems of study. So that's the floor plan there, and the rooms in order are extraction, categorization, distinction, and divulgence. I wanted it to feel a little bit like an archaeological site, but not one that would feel too familiar. I wanted it to feel a little otherworldly. So room 1 was extraction. That's the action of taking something from context, or the drawing of an inference or a deduction. This is that same room. The image is a little deceiving. The gallery was about 40 feet long, so I had quite a lot of space to play with here also. In the second room, I categorized objects according to their form families. Categorization is the action or process of placing in classes or groups, or the process in which ideas and objects are recognized, differentiated, or understood. Here's just a small collection of 3, so you can see the way they all have that kind of bottom indentation in common. The third room is distinction. This is the act of perceiving someone or something as being not the same and often treating as separate, or the action of distinguishing. My system for distinguishing was scale, and I also treated these objects with a little bit more like preciousness by putting them on these white linen and cloths and elevating them from the ground. Room 4 is divulgence. That is to make information known, or the act of revealing something that was previously secret or unknown. And to me, most systems of study, this is their goal, is to understand the secrets of the world that we inhabit, and also to be able to understand things that were previously mysterious to us. So to make these mounds, that's the same unfired clay that I used in my earlier installation. I took those objects and I made indentations. And if you had started in this room, you would not have been able to know what had made those indentations, but because you had gone through this process, you would be able to extrapolate as a viewer the general shape and form of what had made those shapes in the mounds there. And for me, the installation as a whole was thinking about the methodologies and the tools we have for discovering our world and what gaps are left because we just simply don't have ways to measure yet. So this is one iteration of this installation. This is hanging panels of silk. They're each about 9 feet tall. It's titled Still. And when I install this, I put it up into the layout of a labyrinth. And you're invited as the viewer to walk through the work and to find your own path. There's multiple paths you could take. And as you go into the work, because of the transparency of the cloth, the outside world slowly disappears from your view, and you also disappear into the work. In addition to that, and an aspect I didn't anticipate but really enjoy about it, is that it muffles almost all sound from outside of it. I wanted to emulate the feeling of diving into cold water, and so I chose silk. And so when you're in the middle of this piece, you feel the soft fabric brush against your skin, and you're just totally subsumed by white. I always leave an empty space in the middle so that you have a moment to take rest and have a little respite before you continue back out, emerging into the world, and leaving that space of quietness. So another aspect of my practice is material experimentation. And I treat ceramic materials not as a clay glaze relationship. I really disentangle the individual materials and try to find what they can do outside of that traditional mode. So I break a lot of rules, and I do things like put plaster in the kiln, I break a lot of work when it comes out because that's how I'm able to get it out of its firing. And I'm going to show you what part of this process looks like and also what some of the pieces look like. So that form on the left, that soft blue casing is plaster that I have colored with metal oxides. That's fired within a ceramic object, so it doesn't just go everywhere. And I know the ceramicists in the audience are probably like, oh, what are you doing? But that's the fun. And so before this goes into the kiln, you have this plaster bedding, and there's an indentation in the middle, and I pile powders into that indentation. And then I fire it, and it melts. During the melting process, those materials push their way into that plaster bedding. They make their own paths. And what started as a pile of powders becomes this really beautiful, condensed little like nugget of information. When I take it out of the kiln, I remove that plaster bedding from its shell, and then I have a decision to make. Because these two pieces both started like that one on the left. And so I can leave it that way. The plaster is really quite fragile, and so will break down over time. If I leave it that way, I know that there is information kind of embedded within the work that I could have access to. But at the same time, if I take it out of that plaster bedding like the one on the right, I sacrifice knowing its context for the viewer. So you can only know one state of being at a time in this work. Except for you all, you get to see both right now. And what really is intriguing about these pieces is even when I put in a very similar combination of materials or even the same combination, they can come out looking vastly different. And another thing that a lot of people really are attracted to in this work and that I love is that the bubbles of these materials melting are captured in the moment when this material stops melting. So we are given access to a precise moment in time within the kiln that otherwise we wouldn't have the ability to see. So in this work, I'm also exploring the notion of fragments. I place fragments in two different categories, whole and partial. A whole fragment is a fragment that tells its whole story. It's a fragment from which you can derive the rest of its existence before it became fragmented. So for example, the slice of a tree. From that, you can figure out the age of a tree, its species, how large it probably was when it was chopped down, and also the weather conditions from year to year, depending on the size of the rings. A whole fragment, or partial fragment, is unmoored. It doesn't tell you where it came from, and it leaves its mystery unsolved. So this is what this work looks like before it goes into the kiln. So what you're looking at is piles of material. Yeah, it's wild, right? So they're all in trays, and the reason they're in trays is in case something goes awry. I have a very good track record of not ruining shelves, though. And so this is chunks of plaster, powders. The brown is clay. There's also fiber fracs, and then there's a substrate so that if these do melt into my trays, usually I don't even sacrifice the trays, they just come out. So those go through a firing process, and they come out, and I clean them up, and they result in things that look like this. And what I'm interested in here is these new textures that I can get. There's an otherness about them, right? There's haptic qualities. They feel somewhat familiar, but they're kind of unplaceable. So all of that research into material is a body of work in its own right, but it also comes into my other work as information. Here's some of my visual references for the work I'm about to show you. I'm interested in vessels, obviously with the history in ceramics you would be, but I'm also interested in the various ways vessels can exist in our world, whether it's through ritual, or even through practical utilitarian purposes, like in rain pipes and rain gutters. So rain gutters, to me, are very enigmatic. They are meant not to hold. They're a vessel, but they're not meant to hold. They're meant to move their material away as fast as possible, right? So they're a vessel that's meant to be empty. So this piece here, you can see some of that material that I had experimented with earlier coming into the middle of this piece and flowing out. This piece is displayed low so that you have to bend down and look into that slit there. And if you take a flashlight, and I give the viewers the small silver pen lights like in the earlier work, if you shine it on that turquoise surface, there's red pieces and also crystals below the surface that come to life. So I'm also interested in anthropological forms because they give us information about past humans, and that's a way to have empathy with those past humans, and it's a way to understand our own contemporary humanity a little bit more thoroughly too. I love grinding stones as an example of this. Grinding stones are really ubiquitous across cultures and time periods. They're also a system of direct logic, and direct logic is another way that we can really empathize with each other because we can understand the immediacy of needing to do something like grind some wheat, right? And so I've been working on a series of grinding stones. Actually this week and next week in the ceramic studio, I'm making some of these, so you're welcome to come by and see what I'm doing there. And here's some of those works. So in these pieces, when the work is still green, I take that the pestle, the top piece, and I grind it across the surface. It's really important to me that those pestles have good ergonomics so that your hands can imagine touching them and using them. And through grinding these raw materials, I'm able to make marks that show a history of movement and use. And you could, if I didn't put the ceramic materials in these, you could use them as grinding stones. In fact, that's a series I'd like to approach at some point, which is grinding different materials and making marks with them. But I also like leaving a little bit of residue because it insinuates that there's a human who recently has been using these and might come back to their task. So sometimes I also make work to satisfy emotional needs that I have. So this series of work, all the inhales I can manage, I made at a time when I was teaching at 3 separate institutions. I was making a lot of work for shows, and I was closing on my first home. So things were a lot, and I felt like every day I was filling my day with every breath I could take was busy. And so to give myself a space of calm and balance, I made forms that had calm and balance. And so these are about the size of a torso, so they're a counterpart to your presence when you see them, and they curve out into space. I wanted them to have a feeling of breath. This is called entasis, so the columns of the Parthenon are actually not straight. They have a little bit of a bow because the Greeks wanted to make sure that they didn't feel squeezed out of life, right? So this same sense of breath and inhale is what I wanted to put into these works. I put subtle lines across the form so that there's a place for your eye to focus. And also, I wanted the form overall to have just like a subtle color field that you could also get lost within. I really enjoy the amount of viewers who have said they wanted to hug these when I've showed them. I think that, to me, that says that they're making your body have a reaction. And that to me is like it's hitting the right notes. So before I started those large forms, I made smaller versions in order to experiment with different compositional possibilities. And I realized that these smaller forms could be a potential place for exploration as well. So in the way that these relate to body, these relate to hand. I place them in grids. Grids insinuate a sense of continuation. It's a logic that can continue forever. And there's a great writing by Rosalind Krauss called The Grid, where she talks about its relationship to infinity. So I put these in grids when I show them. And in this iteration here, I'm bouncing colors off of each other that are really subtly different in temperature. When you stand back from the work, this causes a little bit of visual vibration that's quite captivating. And on the surfaces, all of the drawings come from rubbings that I made of monuments and crypt walls and ruins, church floors, mosaics, things like that I interacted with while I was in Rome at my residency. Here are some of those rubbings. They're quite small, so I was able to transpose things pretty accurately to scale. Here's another version of this work. And on these, what I'm trying to create is the sense that there is some sort of meaning, but I don't want it to feel so specific that viewers feel like they don't have space for their own interpretation. I'm more interested in the space of sensing than I am in the space of knowing. Here's a side view. So these are some drawings. In 2021, I was invited to participate in a flat file show. A flat file exhibition is where the work is put into drawers so that visitors can go open the drawers. It's a little less formal than a typical like white cube, everything on the walls. And since I don't usually make drawings, I saw this as an opportunity to explore something different. And it was 2021, so we were deep pandemic, and I felt like it was also an opportunity to start digesting that whole experience. So the black forms, which become voids or portals, are spaces through which something else passes through. And that's the rule for any of the black forms. So on the far left one, up in the corner there, that's windows at the Vatican. Down below, that's a really crusty rain gutter. The one in the middle, that is the downspout of a rain gutter. And then here on the far right, these are fence post holes. And I was thinking about us as a collective unit passing through a particular time that felt dark and endless. And then I also drew in the backgrounds weavings. So I was also thinking about interconnectivity and mutual support. And this work is really one of the first times that I made any work that was autobiographical. And it has made me understand how cathartic that can be to have that approach to making your work. So this past year, I made these forms here. So these works are tombs, not for people in my life, but a place to put the fear that I carried during the pandemic. So the pandemic, for many of us, ignited some of our biggest fears, right? And for me, my biggest fear is that I'd lose people. And I felt like I was carrying this. It was like a weighted blanket or like a weight in the bottom of my lungs. And in 2022, last spring, things started to feel a little more hopeful. I decided I needed to put this fear away. Like it was time to stop carrying this every day. And so these are the places where I put those fears. So on these forms, there are really subtle symbols of my family members. The 4 of them represent my 2 parents and my 2 grandparents. And it's not a 1-to-1 ratio because I can't make a tomb that represents my dad. That's too morbid. But they can, they can live across the forms. So this form, or this shape here that you see in the right-hand side, that you really only see from particular vantage points of this work, only when the light hits it right. That is the inside. I'm going to make a little hand movement here. That is like when my grandfather's lock to his woodshop closed. That's the inside of the lock. On this form here, very subtly within the glaze again, there's like the specter of the Virgin Mary. I grew up Catholic, and the Virgin Mary was one of the only places I could locate myself within that religion as a young woman. And it also was a place where I could feel like my other women in my life reflected within that religion too. This one has quilt points on it. My grandmother was a quilter, and she made hundreds of quilts, sometimes for occasions such as buying a new home, sometimes for non-occasions such as painting your bedroom a new color. This form here has, at the bottom, it has this pointed ovoid, which comes from the quilt patterns my grandmother did. And then it's on this wood surface. That wood is from a tree that my father, grandfather, and a cousin cut down out of the forest, drug out, and had cut into boards. The wood lived in my grandfather's wood shop for about 17 years after he passed, and that was a sacred space to my family, so nobody went in there until we tore it down a couple years ago. And I went and I took some of the wood and used part of it for this. So the titles at the bottom have a particular logic also. They reflect the ways that my family shows care and love. My family is German, and so words of affirmation and affection are not always the most familiar. But there are other ways of showing love, and these are the ways that they showed love. So the painful nostalgia that has come with the pandemic has also become a new emotion that I feel like I need to rectify and put to rest, right? I think a lot of us are experiencing things like this. So I've started working on a project that puts me back in contact with my own history. This is an aerial view of the home where I grew up. That's on about 3 acres of land. The fields here are down, but that usually is cornfields, so it's very quiet. And we ran really wild there. It was great. So that's the home, and I've started recognizing the way my family has a sense of deep history also. My mother's family was in the area since about 1850. The log cabin that was built then is the same house that she grew up in. Part of it was added on to. And then my father's family has been in the area since about the early 1900s. And I realized that part of my appreciation for historical objects comes from being surrounded my whole childhood with these objects that had come from within our own history that I had overlooked. Being from a small town, sometimes you just want to get out, and that was my MO as I grew up. These are cast iron kettles. They are tipped up against a pecan tree here, which is where they typically live, and they are brought out twice a year to make lye soap on Butcher Day. Yeah, it's an event. This is the Catholic church where I grew up. I'm no longer practicing, but I still have an appreciation for the sense of deep mystery that I learned here in contact with ritual and meditation, and the way it gives me an interest in the intangible. So I've been going back to this church and exploring through taking rubbings and photographs. This is the This is a tomb from the graveyard. It's the oldest bus I could find, but there's a lot in the graveyard that are illegible also. And there's also a lot that are just kind of lost to history too. So on the wall there you see a bunch of rubbings from inside of the church. A few weeks ago I went and did this as two 80-year-old women cleaned the church, which was like the women who were old when I was young are still there cleaning the church, and I found that amazing. So I'm using these rubbings, and I'm going to turn them into another Breathe Before series. They're going to be combined with rubbings also from Kansas City, so I'm combining my history with my present. On the left there, that's from Union Cemetery, which is the oldest cemetery in Kansas City. And Kansas City also has a very rich local vernacular of architecture that includes a lot of Art Deco clay tiles. So I'll be going around the city when it warms up and making rubbings. And these rubbings will be applied to the largest version of my Breathe Before series to date. I'll have a show in this coming July in Nebraska at the Lux Center, and I have about 60 feet of wall space that I'm going to fill with this work. And there will be 3 distinct colorways, a pink one, a yellow one, and a blue one, so that I can also understand the resonance of those different color families and the impacts they can have individually and also within a space collectively. And my hope is that through combining the local semiology of 2 different places, I can create a new experience for viewers. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. We are going to take questions now. If you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll come to you with the microphone.
You might have explained this, but I'm very interested in how you came up with those gnome shapes when you were describing your family history. I mean, how did you get there with that?
Yeah, thank you actually for that question. I skipped that, actually. So those are based on parabolas. And parabolas are, to me, just incredibly beautiful. They have a nice sense of symmetry. They also are a little impossible because they travel up to a point and they almost get there and then they run back away. And so I like that they kind of tease us, right, as a shape. And so you see that shape actually a lot throughout my work, but I applied it to these pieces because I was thinking about impossibility and mortality in this work, and so it felt appropriate. I grew up in Illinois. Let's see. Oh, it's a little further. I grew up in the cornfield image. Yeah, I'm going the wrong way. Yeah.
I thought this was amazing.
Thank you.
Early on, I was just wondering about the raw clay. It just looks so inviting. Do you dig that, or where does that come from?
Well, I'm glad you've asked that question. So far, I haven't dug any clay. I've just used manufactured clay. But in working on this new project where I'm returning home, I went to the family farm where my mother grew up, and I've been digging clay, and I hope to use it to make this next project.
Can I have a follow-up?
Like, you want an email with a picture?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, yes, absolutely. If you go onto my website, you can sign up for my emailing list, and I send notifications there about projects I'm working on.
And I actually just meant a follow-up question right now.
Oh, okay. That too, yes.
On the inhales pieces, just the lines that go through them are amazing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, which aspect of the line are you interested in?
Back a few on the inhales.
Right. Are you interested in the material or in which aspect of the lines?
Technique, I guess, and just how vibrant the lines are.
Yeah, so those lines they're inscribed, and then some of the powders that you all saw piled up in those scary little setups, I use those powder combinations and I delicately place it in these lines. And there's a texture that's hard to capture on an image of this many at a time, but that texture of the powder largely stays. It kind of melts in place. It condenses a bit, but it is still present after firing.
And on the bigger ones, it was the same technique?
Yeah. It's powders of raw ceramic materials, so it's a little bit of frit, and then it's other things that would be used to make glaze, but they're not a full glaze.
So, thank you, Elaine. This is really amazing and so much fun. And I'm curious about the first thing you showed us with like those cylindrical kind of guys standing up, and viewers were invited to take the light and look inside. They looked taller than you could actually look inside. So how did they access looking inside those columns?
So they're actually about waist height for most people. So you bend down and you look down into them. And I practice yoga, and when you bend inwards, the idea is that it invites a more internal, intimate experience. Do they?
I'll second that. Thank you. This is amazing.
Thank you.
And you've spoken a lot about your relationship with shape and material, and I was wondering about your relationship with color. Is it something that comes out of the material, or do you ever start with a color in mind?
Yeah, color is something that I have felt called more to investigate because I have a very quiet, muted palette. And I think the muted palette comes a lot from the sources I look at, from the stone, and it also comes from wanting my work to feel peaceful and quiet, right? But I envy people who use hot pink.
When you're making these forms, I know nothing about ceramics. Are these free forms, or are you using what is your shape that you're shaping these ovals, these outward kind of shields? They're almost like shields in some way.
Yeah, so when I make these, I have a mold, and it's bisque, which is like a semi-hardened ceramic object, and I push slabs, which are kind of like pancakes, into that shape, and that shapes them. And then I put another slab on the back to cap them off and to make a spot to hang them. I have some of these in my studio in ceramics that I brought along with me. So if you want to come by at any point, like I said, to visit and look at them and the other work I'm working on, you're more than welcome to.
I'm curious, Elaine, do you read for pleasure?
Yes.
So what are you reading?
What am I reading
Yeah.
right now? I'm currently reading The Sacred and the Profane by Mircea Eliade. And then I'm also reading Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a really popular one. My partner and I are reading that together. He's really interested in native plants, so we fight over that book. But when I have it, I read that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.